Damn, I just got the Pye report. This is the fourth investigation in as many years. Stephen Thomas Pye had just done this one. I had used 4 different Pye firms in the last 4 years, using random cities, random times of the year, etc., thinking that my wife and her lover had fooled the previous ones, but this new investigator would find they're cheating. I just got off the phone with Mr. Thomas. He told me that his people here and his associates in Dallas had surveilled both my wife, Tiffany, and Scott Decker for a week, both when they were at their office the first 4 days of the week and in Dallas where they both attended a work seminar for 3 days. My wife, Tiffany, was the administrative assistant to Scott Decker, CEO of a fully owned subsidiary of a major international company. As admin. Assistant, she generally traveled with him, and he traveled a lot. Mr. Thomas said he would send a written report, but in general, he found. For the 4 days locally, before their trip to Dallas, they were followed and observed. They had lunch together all 4 days, then immediately returned to work. On the second day, the 2 of them stopped at a local bar after work. Each of them had 2 drinks, then each went to their respective home. Their spouses were home when they got there, and we broke off surveillance, assuming the spouses would be aware of their activities until the next morning. On the other 3 days, they both went directly home from work, and their spouses were there when they arrived. The Dallas trip was slightly more interesting, but not much. Each of the 3 days, they attended the work seminar, as they should have. They ate dinner together each night, and each night they went out dancing. After about an hour of dancing and drinks, they went to their respective hotel rooms and didn't come out until morning. Their 2 rooms were separated by 10 rooms, so there was no connecting door between rooms. A camera pointed down the hall showed that each night neither left their room until the next morning. The only thing that was at all suspicious was their dancing. My agent described it as looking like 2 people in love. There was no inappropriate touching, but certainly a closeness, and he usually had his arm around her all the way back to their table. They were followed to the airport, and the agent made sure that they boarded and that the airplane did, in fact, leave for home. 4 PA reports at random dates over the last 4 years have found basically the same information. Nothing. Tiffany and I are both 36 and have been married for 15 years. We were exclusive for the last 3 years of college and married shortly after graduation. Tiffany is a doll, not beautiful, but would be considered pixie cute with a fantastic 5'6" body. She is very outgoing, and people enjoy having her around. Her boss, Scott Decker, is about my size, 6'1", 190 pounds. But if it was between the 2 of us, Scott would get the attention of all the girls. He is quite an attractive man. I have talked to Tiffany a few times about her apparent closeness with Scott Decker. The first few times she said there was nothing between them except work. She promised that she would never fool around behind my back, and even offered to take a lie detector test any time I wanted. She said he was just a co-worker and a good friend. The last time we talked about it, she referred to him as a special friend. I guess he got a promotion. Tiffany and I have gone out for dinner and dancing a few times with Scott and his wife, Gail. Scott and Tiffany talk to each other and dance with each other much more than they do with their spouses. One time when Scott and Tiffany went out on the dance floor, I noticed that Gail gave them a raised eyebrow as if saying, "What? Again?" I guess she notices their closeness also. I have talked to Tiffany about finding another job just for me, just because I'm very jealous of her being so close to Scott. She says, "That's silly." She loves her job and tells me again that she would never go behind my back and that she would be willing to take a lie detector test. I have spent thousands of dollars with private investigators over 4 years and found nothing. Last night, Tiffany was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked by. In a more serious tone than usual, she said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" When I sat down, she said, "Scott and Gail have invited us to their lake house for the weekend. I told them I was sure we would love to go, but I would have to check with you. I think it would be great." Okay with you? The first thing that crossed my mind is, 5 days a week at work isn't enough. Now you want to be with him on the weekend, too. I tried, but couldn't think of a reason not to go. With obvious displeasure, I said okay. Friday afternoon, Tiffany and I packed the car and headed to Scott and Gail's lake house. We had a map to show how to get there, but I tried to surprise her by asking, "Have you been there before?" She said she hadn't been, but I'm not sure I believed her. We drove for about 50 miles, finally coming to the lake at about 4 o'clock. It took a while to find their house, but when we finally did, there were 4 people on the front porch waiting for us. The only one I knew was Scott. I assumed Gail was inside. In addition to Scott, the welcoming committee consisted of a very large, well-built man, a middle-aged woman that appeared to be his wife, and an extremely attractive 20-something woman. She had long red hair, and I would consider her to be beautiful. Everyone besides her had on shorts and t-shirt. She had on a skimpy bikini. We parked and headed for the porch. After we were introduced to everyone, I asked Scott where Gail was. He said she wasn't there, but gave no explanation as to why. It seemed a little strange that we came to visit Scott and Gail wasn't there. Probably because I had wondered for years about Tiffany and Scott's relationship, my spidey senses started getting active. Was Scott fooling around with this beautiful young woman? Did Gail find out? What does Tiffany know about this young lady? Tiffany didn't seem at all surprised to see her here. Tiffany and I were shown to our room. We dropped the small amount of luggage we brought, then joined the others in the great room. The building and the interior were very rustic and very large. I'd guess there were 5 bedrooms and as many baths. The very large man, introduced as Larry something, asked if I would like a beer. I said, "Sure," and he motioned for me to follow him to the kitchen. He seemed very intent on getting me into a one-on-one conversation, so I talked to him for 10 to 15 minutes. He was a very pleasant man, but after a while I was ready to join the others. Strangely, as we came back into the great room, he loudly announced, "We're back." Even stranger, Tiffany and Scott were off in a corner, and I would swear they were surprised and just separating from a lover's hug. Both of them were red-faced and appeared to be stepping away from each other. I didn't like any part of what I'd seen so far. Gail's not here. Larry seemed to want to keep me talking in the kitchen. Who is the young, gorgeous girl? Tiffany seems to have been in an embrace with Scott. I had to ask Tiffany what the hell was going on, so I started walking back to the kitchen and motioned for Tiffany to follow me. She had to see that I was at least confused and probably quite upset. Instead of following me into the kitchen, Tiffany stopped and asked Scott if there was someplace private that Tiffany and I could talk. No one seemed at all surprised at this request. My spidey senses were flaming at this point. Scott pointed out a room we could use, and Tiffany and I went in and closed the door. "Tiffany, what in the hell is going on?" She had the expression of finally having to confront something that she was dreading talking about. "Tom, I haven't been totally honest with you about this weekend, but please let me explain everything without interrupting. When I'm finished, I'll answer any question you have, and I'm sure you'll have many. First of all, Gail decided not to come this weekend. Gail, Scott, and I have had several meetings over lunch and dinner planning this weekend. When I'm finished, I think you will see why you weren't invited to these meetings. Everything is basically Gail's idea, with some input from both Scott and I. Scott has accepted a promotion which will require a move to England. He and Gail will be moving in 2 weeks. His replacement will be a woman from the Cleveland office. I'm sure that Scott leaving and a female replacement will please you. There are 3 things that I need to tell you about Scott and me. First of all, as I have always told you, Scott and I have never had an affair. We have never been in the same bed together. Secondly, and this is the hardest thing that I have ever had to tell you, I love you as much now as I ever have, but I also am in love with Scott. Let me emphasize, I didn't just say, I love Scott, I said that I am in love with Scott. I couldn't be quiet any longer. I jumped to my feet and screamed. I can't believe it. You brought me to that asshole's house to tell me you're leaving me for that same asshole. I'm out of here. You can find your own way home. Oh, that's right. We don't have a home anymore. You're off to England with the asshole. I started to the door as Tiffany grabbed my arm and yelled, "Please, Tom, that is not at all what I said. Please sit down and let me finish. I love you, and I'm not leaving you, ever, ever. You're my husband, and I will be with you until death do us part." I calmed just slightly and sat back down. Let me reiterate, everything is basically Gail's idea. I guess the next thing I should do, before continuing with why we are here this weekend, is tell you who the other people are and why they are here. The nice man that you talked to in the kitchen is Larry. He is head of security at our company and is only here to make sure everyone is happy. I broke in. So he is here to keep me in line, right? Tiffany didn't answer, just continued with introductions of the other people. Jackie, the beautiful girl, is here for you, if you so desire. She is a sweetheart and also a high-end escort. The middle-aged lady Janet is actually Larry's wife and also a great cook. A light suddenly went on in my head. The rest of this charade all of a sudden became quite clear. I could see exactly what Tiffany, Scott, and Gail had planned. Tiffany knew that Scott would be out of her life after this weekend. The two lovers, Scott and Tiffany, will take the weekend to finally be together as lovers. After that, Scott and his wife Gail will be off on their adventure in England. On Sunday, after I watch my wife make love to someone else all weekend, she and I will hold hands as we skip merrily to our car and live happily ever after. Is this woman crazy? They brought Larry in to make sure I don't kill Scott or just happen to drown my unfaithful wife. Jackie is here to offer me companionship with the same goal as Larry, but a little different approach. All of this to give Scott and Tiffany a weekend of love. All right, Tiffany, I don't agree with any of this. Where the hell is Gail? You say this is all her idea? Where the hell is she? She decided that for her emotional well-being, it would be best for her not be here. In return for the weekend, Scott has signed a post-nuptial agreement that if he and I have contact of any kind at any time in the future, Scott would get nothing in a divorce. Gail gets 100% of the assets. I have signed a similar paper for you. Both papers begin when Scott and Gail leave for England. Since Scott and I work together, both papers also stipulate no sexual or romantic contact between this Sunday evening and when they leave for England, Tom. I will truly be all yours after this weekend, and I swear to spend the rest of my life making up for the hurt I'm causing you now. Why am I here, when Gail isn't? Easy. There is no way that you would agree to let me come to Scott's lake house without you. Same reason you weren't invited to the planning luncheons. You would have just said hell no to everything. And what if I just say no to the whole goddamn thing now and ask you to either join me for an immediate trip back home or you stay here with Scott and say goodbye to our marriage? It's not like that. Please understand that although you are my lifelong soulmate, I need this weekend with Scott for closure. Also, Gail is expecting a call from you. Since this is primarily her idea, she will explain everything to you. Her number is on the kitchen counter. Tiffany, I'm asking you one more time not to do this. Tiffany walked to me and gave a passionate kiss on my lips, then said, "It'll be okay. You'll see." Tiffany walked out of the room and took Scott by the hand as they disappeared from view. Larry kept his eye on me for the rest of the evening and constantly stayed between me and Scott. I thought seriously about just leaving and filing for divorce, but I had to know what this is all about and how far it would go. I found Jackie and told her, "She is tempting, but I'm not going to help Tiffany shatter our wedding vows. Tiffany will have to do that all by herself." I told Jackie that, as far as I was concerned, she could go home, or if she is curious, she can stay and laugh at all the insanity. The next time I saw the lovers was at dinner. Janet obviously had been told where to seat everybody. Scott sat at the head of the table, Tiffany by him. Larry was between me and Scott with Jackie next to me. Janet, when she wasn't serving, sat across from her husband Larry. I assumed that by now my lovely wife had become an adulteress, thereby making me a cuckold. I noticed, probably at Scott's suggestion, she was not wearing her wedding rings. The only thing I said through the whole meal was, "Not good," as I pointed out her bare finger. After dinner, Jackie put on a beautiful red bikini and went for a swim. I sat by the pool, rethinking my decision not to use her services. Then Scott and Tiffany came out hand in hand, with swimsuits on. Larry sat by me and tried to start a conversation. It became quite evident that this whole charade had been choreographed. Shortly after everyone was around the pool, Tiffany came over and sat beside me. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I love you. It'll all work out. We'll talk when we get home." I was thinking, this woman is nuts, as I quickly got up and walked away, telling her loud enough for all to hear, "Go to hell." I avoided everyone for the rest of the evening except Larry, of course. He was always somewhere off in the distance with his eye on me. I liked Larry. Other times we could be friends. I decided to call Gail. Maybe she could shed some light on this train wreck. She must have been expecting me. She answered on the first rig. She must have also added me to her caller ID. With a sad voice, she said, "How is this whole sad affair going? Are you still at the lake house? Gail, what the hell caused you to come up with this disaster? I don't know about you and Scott, but this is going to ruin my marriage to Tiffany." Tom, let me explain my thinking. I admit that I was thinking of my own marriage to Scott. I didn't give a lot of thought to you and Tiffany. I think that women can move forward and forgive an affair easier than men can. I know Scott loves Tiffany deeply and has suffered for 4 years from her refusal to make love. She always told him she wouldn't have a cheap affair behind your back. I offered them a compromise, a weekend of love in exchange for never contacting each other again. I could just see them, thousands of miles apart, but in constant communication. I was afraid of where that might lead. If they ever communicate in the future, in any way, it could financially destroy each of them. I didn't invite you to the planning luncheons because you would just say, "Hell no," to everything. Upon entering our bedroom, I discovered, not surprisingly, that the only luggage there was mine. Tiffany's stuff had been moved, so it was no longer our bedroom, just my bedroom. It made me very sad to think that Tiffany and Scott were now in their bedroom. Lying in bed, I kept wondering how Tiffany could think that after this weekend, she and I could just magically resume our loving relationship. All I could assume is that their 4-year emotional affair has them thinking that the world owes them and everyone will understand their needs. About midnight, Jackie knocked on the door and came in to ask if I was all right. She also inferred that she was still available if needed. I thanked her for the offer and told her my refusal was one of the hardest things I have ever done. But no thanks. She said that her room assignment was originally the same as mine, but that she had found an unassigned room. I couldn't sleep at all, so I went out by the pool. The hot tub was separated from the pool by a 3-foot rock wall, so I found a lounge chair and dragged it next to the hot tub. The sound of the water was soothing, and I eventually fell asleep. I slept for an hour or so, then was awakened by voices approaching the pool. I immediately recognized the voices of the two lovers. They couldn't see me, but I was only 10 feet away, hidden behind the short rock wall. Tiffany said, "Oh, Scott, this is so wonderful. I have loved you for so long, and I'm finally able to show you how much. I'm going to miss you, but we have 2 days to get in a lifetime of loving. Let's get naked and make love in the pool. Get your suit off. I'll get us a couple of drinks." Tiffany got up and went to the kitchen for drinks. I felt like throwing up. I could see my whole life going to hell. I hated him and hated Tiffany, for the absolute total void that I was feeling. Scott was out of his suit waiting for Tiffany when I came up behind him. I yelled loud enough for everyone in the house to hear me. "Hey, asshole!" Asshole seemed to have become my nickname for him. As he turned, I kicked him. He hadn't fully turned toward me, so I caught him in the lower abdomen. I was barefoot, so if I had been on target and hit the pelvic bone rather than soft abdomen, I probably would have broken a couple of toes. He doubled over and fell backward into the pool. I knew Larry would be out of bed and on his way soon, but I didn't think there would be a physical confrontation with Larry. He might call me a few names, but wouldn't want to face assault charges. And anyway, the damage to his boss had already been done, and Larry wouldn't be looking for revenge. Filed away in my mind was the fact that Tiffany came running to see if Scott was hurt, but didn't bother checking on me. I had seen enough. I got my bag, got in my car, and headed home. I did one thing before leaving, though. I took my wedding ring off and left it on the kitchen counter. Tiffany would maybe understand just how much she had hurt me. I spent the rest of the weekend sitting at home in my recliner, staring at the TV. I really didn't pay much attention to what was on. My mind was busy with pictures of my lovely wife with that asshole Scott. Since I had been to the lake house and knew the layout, I could picture them in various rooms, embracing with a big smile, kissing as they held each other overlooking the lake. In bed together with him doing things only I should be doing, and her doing things that should be only for me. I wondered what she would say when she came home, if she came home. I really wished she wouldn't come home, but I don't know where else she would go. Sunday evening, a car pulled up and stopped in front of my house. It was Scott and Tiffany. They sat and held hands and talked for what must have been 15 minutes, occasionally kissing. Finally, he got out with the intention of coming around to open her car door. He apparently had asked Tiffany to wait and let him come around and open her door, obviously for my benefit. I think he forgot that the human body stiffens up after an injury, then a long ride. He was wincing getting out of his door from the kick I had given him 2 days earlier. He needed to hold on to the 2 car fenders to work his way around to her side. He finally got to her side and opened her car door, looking quite uncomfortable. He helped Tiffany out of the car. It was more that Tiffany helped Scott out of the car. I was pleased that my parting shot at the lake house obviously had hindered their lovemaking. This was all for my benefit, to show me that he was giving her back to me, after she had stayed with him when she had a choice of him or me at the lake house. They held each other like lovers, not caring what me or the neighbors might think. I had had enough. I opened the front door and took a step toward Scott. "If you aren't out of here in 5 seconds, I'm going to do more than just kick the shit out of you." Scott limped quickly back to his car and drove away. I walked back in the house and sat in my recliner. Tiffany hadn't even watched him drive away. She walked in the front door wearing a fake smile. "I'm home, honey." Her attitude seemed so ridiculous, acting like she was just coming home from an evening out with the girls. I just ignored her and turned up the TV. She came over and tried to kiss me, but I pushed her away. The only thing I said to her was, "You're in the guest bedroom from now on. I'm going to a lawyer tomorrow and start paperwork for a legal separation. Eventually, one of us will meet someone and want a divorce, but for now, we can coexist here. You can be free to replace your lost lover with whoever you want." I went back to watching TV. Tiffany started sobbing as she went up the steps. In one weekend, she had lost her lover and her husband. Subscribe to our channel to keep your partner from cheating on you, and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next.